Okay, welcome to Exceptional Circumstances for Exceptional Learners. I am so excited about today's episode. I've been waiting to find out more about this amazing device that you may have seen me post on my Facebook and Instagram. But today we are going to talk about bridging the classroom with the homeschool, continuity of behavior tracking for children with special needs. If any of you have had to track behaviors in a class, you might remember either from a practicum or from your day to day just how difficult it can be, and whether are you looking for the positive behavior or the negative one, and where's the clipboard and who has it. And I'm really just inspired by someone's experience, how they were able to take what they experienced and created this device that I really think might make a difference for some families, and most importantly, the children. So I was so excited when I got this message from Nicody on LinkedIn, um, just asking me a little bit more about what I did in special ed. And when I took the call, I had to have my camera off because my 2-year-old was running around, but I wanted to know more. And I'm sure the slides that he is going to share with us today will be similar to the ones that he showed me. And I said, this needs to get exposure. Like, we need to talk about this because I can think of so many classes that can and benefit. So what I love about the story here as well is this came about from a dad looking to make things better for his own son. And, when it comes to the world of special ed, so many of the people that are the strongest advocates are parents. And when we can build a coalition together to help one another, I just think that's a wonderful thing. So Nicody, do you want to share a little bit more about how you kind of got here, and then we'll introduce Dr. Jenny. Oh, you're on mute.
Oh,
Oh, go ahead. I keep hitting it. You're good. You're on mute now.
that's blooper reel stuff, right? So my journey really started when my son entered kindergarten, and he is autistic. Within 4 hours of him going to his very first day of kindergarten, we got a phone call, wanted to set up a meeting. That meeting was set within 2 weeks of his first day of kindergarten. And in that meeting, we were pushed really strongly to move him to an isolated learning environment. And over the next 2 months, he was moved where the majority of his time was now in that isolated learning environment, apart from his gen ed classroom. But it really didn't hit me how much we asked teachers to do until I sat down for his IEP meeting. And in that IEP meeting, we got reports of assessments that they had done on my son. And in those reports, they had written in symptoms of absent seizures that they hadn't told my wife or myself about over the last 2 months that they're doing the assessments. And that's really when it dawned on me that, we're asking teachers to do so much. We're asking them to be medical triage teams for emerging medical issues. We're asking them to be psychologists. We're asking them to be behavior analysts. We're asking them to be social workers, and like a lot more. And that's all on top of them doing what their primary responsibility is, which is teaching. And so I decided at that point that I wanted to be part of the solution. And so I've been reaching out to people like Rebecca to get some of that feedback and to talk about how to be part of, not be a solution, but be part of the solution, where teachers, parents, the support systems within inside the schools and the support systems that the child has external to the schools can all work more effectively together. because I think just from a community standpoint, if a community works together, we can accomplish almost anything. So my personal background is in technology. So I don't know if any of you have seen the Coca-Cola Freestyle soda dispenser. It's the one with the touchscreen where you can get all the different flavors of Coke. I was the architect for the user interface on that before it came out. I worked on Xbox before it came out. I worked on maps.bing.com before it came out, and a lot of other technologies. And so I really wanted to use my tool set to help improve the lives of students, teachers, schools, and just everybody overall.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And then we also have joining him today, Dr. Jenny Klein Sosa, and I will have her introduce herself.
Thank you for having us. We really appreciate being here. So I see the world of special education through many different lenses. In my professional career, I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been working in the field for 10 plus years. I did my training and most of my experience has been with children and adolescents. So I've worked with kids who have had all kinds of issues and are managing lots of different challenges. And I've worked with schools and multidisciplinary teams to try to figure out how do we come together as a holistic team that includes every component of that child's needs in a way that moves them along, moves them forward. So from a professional standpoint, I can see the role of schools being pivotal in that, because schools are really what brings it all together. You have all of the supports on staff on the ground. You have the teacher who brings it all together for them there, and then you have the external providers that are another layer to that, all in support of that child. So I had been doing that for many years, and then I had my family, and around 3 years into with my older kiddo, we realized that he also had special needs, and so for me it became a very personal issue at that point. It started professional because it was an interest area of mine, and then it became very, very personal. And so I see things now, and have seen, for many years. He's about to turn 8. The other side of the table. So what it's like as a parent to sit, and listen to the feedback from all the different providers, and try to piece it all together and understand it, and then to figure out what are the best ways to help him move forward. So I see both vantage points. And what brought me to Mytaptrack to work with Nicody, we had gotten to a point where my son had made a lot of progress, but there was a bit of a plateau. There were starting to be some, discussions in the team meetings where we may have had different perspectives. And so we actually, my husband and I, started searching for something like this, some sort of tool to help us be data-oriented, data-driven in our decision-making for him in particular. And we came across Mytaptrack, and it just opened up a whole other world. I think for kiddos who, like my son, whose issues are more in the behavior, socio-emotional behavior realm versus in the strict academic realm, sometimes it's a little more difficult for parents to advocate for their kiddos in the schools, especially if they're on par with grade level academics or even beyond. And so something like this can be very, very powerful in those conversations, in bringing the team together to figure out what the child really needs.
So how long has Mytaptrack been around? I know that the LinkedIn ad was like, we're on 2.0. I know it's the first that I'm kind of hearing about it. I guess I want to know, how long has this been going on? And also, where is it individual parents? Is it school districts? And what does that look like?
Yeah, so I can jump in here. So Mytaptrack, we launched our initial, what we call minimum viable product, which is where we take our initial guess as to, we think this will help. And we got it out into 4 different schools across the country. And over the course of the last year, we've been collecting feedback. And so we got to the point where we had enough feedback to say, we need to change the actual hardware device. Because we start off with something very similar to like the Amazon Dash button where you could like order Tide. And we started off with that, and that was our first, let's see if this helps. And then as we got feedback, it was like, okay, well, we wish that it could be able to track multiple kids, or we wish that we could be able to wander off outside of Wi-Fi range and keep tracking and then come back. And then we also had, you know, an evolution of our dashboard as well, where we got something out there, we got feedback, hey, this isn't quite what we were looking for, and we evolved that. So really this last fall was where we were just starting to really launch our plan for general adoption. So.
And what a time, right?
Right.
So this is, I mean, in a regular setting, I think this has so much potential, but now that we're in this limbo phase of, are we doing hybrid or are we full at home? How do we track data? A few weeks ago, we had the episode where we talked about, you know, IEP goals and objectives. Is it reasonable to keep some of the behavior objectives in the IEP if we can't track them? And so I think, you know, I just see such an opportunity to really engage families in this, you know, amazing way. So let's see, like, I want to see it. I want to see the great data and what we can learn.
Yeah, so just 1 minute, let me.
Mytaptrack simplify.
Oh, that was fun.
And I see some of you have joined us, so feel free in the chat box to ask questions. Also, let us know where you are from and what your position is. You know, we kind of talked a little bit at the beginning about, it's all about building community. And while we might not have all of the answers, together we can come up with something that will work and help your students get to where they can be.
All right, so, and of course went to the second slide. Okay, so when we took a look at this opportunity to speak here today, one of the things that we realized is that we really needed to speak to where teachers are now. We built this initially as a way to simplify the classroom, to make it so that tracking behaviors was a click for one behavior, 2 clicks for another, et cetera, and allow teachers to be in the moment while capturing better information. But as we took a look at this, especially over the course of the end of last year and going into this year, we realized that there's a fundamental difference in what's going on in an in-classroom environment versus a remote classroom environment. And so Jenny, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah. So if you think about in a typical classroom environment where a teacher is being asked to track specific behaviors that are listed in a child's IEP, maybe for more than one child at a time, what's out there right now are things like apps where the teacher would have to pull out a phone and pull up the app and click in front of the child. There are a lot of challenges with that in terms of, you know, keeping that connection with the kid, in terms of, you know, making sure that you're tracking sufficiently and in a way that other kiddos don't, you know, see what's happening and understand that there is one target child that the teacher is watching. So it's a real challenge for a teacher to do all of that in the context of actually hitting the curriculum, you know, getting that out there while managing the behavior and tracking it along the way. So, you know, these behaviors they don't stop, and they could potentially impact the child in really connecting with the teacher and understanding the learning content. Collecting the data, it takes the time away from the teacher, it takes the teacher away from the child. You might have multiple kids that have different kinds of behaviors that you're tracking. So the teacher has to really be nimble in their thinking to be able to toggle back and forth between introducing the academics and tracking that behavior. It's a lot to ask, and it's very cumbersome. And so what we try to do with our system is we provide the clicker that Nicody talked about that is discrete. It can hang on a lanyard, it can be in a pocket, it can be out of the way so that the target child and all the other kids don't know it's there, yet the teacher is continually tracking but maintaining eye contact with those kids, maintaining, pointing at the board, and being able to keep them following along on the content while tracking at the same time in a way that's completely discrete. That's sort of how we thought about it initially in a classroom setting. So then, we come into this strange time that we find ourselves in, and the kids are home for, in some cases, in a hybrid model, they'll be home part of the time. In, an all full remote distance learning environment, it's the whole day. And really what's happening now is that, there will be instances where the children will interact with the teacher through Zoom, may or may not be synchronized, could be recorded, but those interactions are going to be limited, especially for the younger kids. And so those connection points between the teacher and the child, where they can, where the teacher can assess understanding and where the teacher can assess behavior, are going to be more limited, period. So then who does it fall on? It falls on the parent. It's the parent who's sitting next to that child, making sure that they're following along and attending and completing all the assignments that have been, provided for them. But really, for a lot of kids on IEPs, they, in the classroom setting, have, maybe a one-to-one aide. So you can't really do that at home. So who becomes that point person? It's the parent. And that is a real challenge, not only for parents who have the time, but not the training to do so, but the parents who are working and don't have the time even to be able to sit there and monitor and support and give that feedback in an ongoing and meaningful way to keep that child connected. So when we say varying levels of parent engagement, it's really what can parents do? What do they have the time for? What are they available for? And then you have to also consider, other children in the home and other needs. So, in that kind of a context, for a lot of families, we're seeing a lot of regressions. We're seeing regressions in academics, which is, first and foremost, a lot of times because they're not able to really access that material any longer in that venue. And then you think of all the other barriers. Maybe their behavior looks really different at home than it does in the classroom environment. I hear this often from parents saying things like, well, my child just doesn't listen to me. If my kiddo was in the classroom, they would listen to that teacher, but for some reason, when I say it, it's not the same. This is a common challenge. And so we end up seeing a lot of spikes in behavior issues for kids who had existing difficulties, but then also you see behavior issues pop up for kids who never even did before. So there's so many dimensions to these regressions that may be happening across academics all the way through socio-emotional and behavior characteristics. And it's really hard to get down on paper from a parent's perspective. What does that look like? How often is that happening? How does it really impact whether or not the child is listening and learning? And so that's a real challenge that's happening right now. And then, ideally there are going to be lots of different models for schools and districts across the country, but ideally at some point, the kids will go back into the classroom full time. And then what? How do we know where they've been? How do they know what their experience was like? What worked at home that may be helpful to know in the school context? What didn't work? Who is this new child that's coming back into the classroom? Because these children are different. They've just undergone a very difficult time and have had to manage that with their parents by their side, doing the very best that they can. But really, I think one of the big things that are lost, that is necessary to be able to figure out what these kids need when they get back into the classroom, is that communication piece between the teacher and the parent, in a way that there's continuity, that at least continuity in assessment, in understanding who is this child now, what have they gone through, and what do they need when they step back into that classroom. And so that's going to be tough. That's going to be really tough for a lot of families and a lot of schools.
And I think too, the idea of just collecting data could be its own job at this point, right?
Indeed.
So as a teacher, I want to be able to look at the data with my team, and I want to analyze that. The collecting, I think, takes up more time than the actual fitting and determining what this means. I can think of many a night where I have the data, but now, we have a meeting and I'm trying to put it into an Excel sheet to make the graph, to make it a visual and talking point, because while I know what it means, it might not mean anything to, the parent or the administrator. So, I think the easier we can make that data collection and make it in a visual way, then we can get to the whole point of us taking the data in the first place, to help the child to come up with the interventions and to figure out what's working and what's not. And those are where, if you've ever been in an IEP meeting where everybody is kind of on the same page, which is rare, but it's a beautiful thing, that's where success happens. When the teachers and the parents and we're all on the same, on the same page and looking for the same things, no matter what the behavior is or what you're looking for, that's where you're going to have success. So I just, and that's just through my own experiences. That's what I've seen. And I wish that I could have that for every meeting and for every child.
Well, and to add to that, one of the challenges of not having that data and not being on that same page is that the responsibility of finding a solution falls on that teacher, because they're the ones with the information at that point. And so it really does increase the amount of pressure put on a teacher to solve issues rather than it being spread across an entire team. And so as we took a look at that, the way that we have up to this point tracked data, we wanted to change. We wanted to make it so that our effort in tracking data was much, much simpler, but got better information. And so we came up with the button, the Mytaptrack button. The idea is that you click the button once for one behavior, twice for another, 3 times for another, and so on. And as soon as the button's clicked, it's sending that information via Wi-Fi. So as soon as the teacher clicks the button, their job in the reporting process and in that capturing process is done. That information then gets sent via Wi-Fi to a secure portal where it visualizes that information in a lot of the most common ways. This is where I'd like to quickly switch over, and we're going to go to the actual portal itself.
Just going to step in really quickly just to say that typically what happens, at least in my experience, is that there's paper and pencil. You're there in the classroom, it's a tick mark, it's a check mark, it's something where you're tallying over the course of a day, or in other cases, you wait till the end of the day and you think about what happened today, can I summarize it, and you write it down at that point. And there are challenges in terms of the validity and reliability of that information done in that way. So that's one piece. And then you mentioned it, Rebecca, earlier, you sort of have to put that into some other kind of online Excel spreadsheet, which takes time to then analyze it. So this cuts all of that out. No more tick marks, No more inputting into Excel. None of that time is necessary because it's automatically displayed for you when you log in.
Yeah, and so what we're able to do is we're able to like capture the frequency information just from those clicks. We actually also are able to capture durations. So instead of you as a teacher, for let's say an IEP goal of on-task minutes, of having to look up at the clock and estimate out how long it was, or you have, let's say, distraction or something to that effect. Instead of you having to estimate that in your head, now you can get like the average for how long on average the individual was distracted or had various other types of issues. And then the last graph over here actually pinpoints throughout the day when the different behaviors are occurring. So you can get an instant snapshot of what's going on and where the problem areas are. You click on the graph and it brings you down to that day's details. And the data automatically sorts itself into the child's schedule. So you as the teaching team actually have a lot more context as to what was going on and what the behavior actually means. So for example, here we have reading starting at 8:15, and our first area where we're tracking distraction isn't until 9:20. So that's actually more towards the end of class, which allows more people around that teacher to ask clarifying questions. An example of this was my son. He had behavior issues during reading. And so we started using Mytaptrack to track it. We all sat down as a team and we pulled up the data, and it turned out the last 15 minutes was where the majority of the behavior issues occurred. And so the principal was the actual one who asked the question was, okay, so we see this, we see that's the last 15 minutes, what's going on in the classroom consistently in the last 15 minutes? And the teacher took a look at our teaching plan, was like, well, that's really when we start transitioning over to writing. And that was the actual issue. It was a writing issue. He started disengaging when writing became the focal point. So the goal here is to provide that clarity at a glance as to what's going on. Durations, you can see every single duration that's tracked. And so, for example, let's say you're tracking distracted behavior. We see that in math, the student got distracted almost at the beginning of that class, and it wasn't until the end of writing where they really got back. And that duration of 1 hour and 55 minutes skewed the rest of the durations that that student had. So now we can start focusing on them. Okay, well, it looks like they get distracted for, let's say, 2 minutes during reading, but this one right here really is the issue. And so just by clicking that button, you're capturing that information. You're allowing the full team to more fully engage. Interval-based charting. Sure that a lot of you have filled out these, but with this, you just specify what the interval is and it sets up that chart for you. So it starts pulling all this information into the different views that are most commonly used. And then the notes section here allows you to add some of that qualitative information about what was going on when the different behaviors occurred. And one of the big things that we saw when we transitioned from our minimum viable product to this next generation one is we wanted to capture, the theory was that information captured at the time it occurred is the most accurate information because you're not having to remember it. And you don't forget it, right? And so we made it so you could actually hold down the button and say note and talk into it for up to 12 seconds. And a timestamp is added here, as well as that transcribed note. So suddenly you're able to capture the antecedent. You're able to capture environmental issues at the times they occur, which gives much better context to, like, let's say you're reaching out to a BCBA, or you're getting the school psychologist involved or a behavior analyst involved. They have a lot better context as to what was going on. When we put this together, we really wanted to make it so it could track anything. So this is just a text box here when you're entering in behaviors, and I can type in anything I want to, including this is the behavior I want to track. And that's what it'll be called. So you can adapt it to positive measurements. You can adapt it to negative measurements. You can adapt it to symptoms of medications if you wanted to. tried to make it as simple as possible. Specifying if you're going to track it as a duration is just a checkbox. But part of the challenge that we saw when taking a look at Mytaptrack is right now a child either has to have full-time support or has to have some other mechanism in place to pull them out if some of their behaviors get too challenging. And so for some school districts, they have a full-time person one-on-one with the child constantly. Others, like my son, where he gets moved into an isolated learning environment, he gets moved in a gen ed environment and back again. And really his behaviors are that limiting factor to him getting into the gen ed environment. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to make it so that schools could offer on-demand support to teachers. So let's say you had a child in your classroom and they had outbursts. And when they had outbursts, the teacher needs help. Well, by them actually clicking the button and having somebody in your main office subscribe to notifications, either via email or text message, suddenly they're able to get that notification right away that this behavior is occurring, provide that on-demand support to the classroom when it's most needed, and then get back out again when that child is back into the normal swing of things and is able to engage with his peers and classmates or her peers and classmates. And then because I'm a bit of a technology nut, I went and made an AI that you can actually subscribe to, and it will identify what the pattern for that child is and notify you if it detects that pattern has changed. So I'm less of one of those people who really likes to look at charts on a daily basis. So that was my motivation. One of the things that we've added in recently is the ability to add in when support changes occur. And what this really means is when you come back to this graph, get rid of some of the notifications here, we have automated data that's generated. We're going to come back to May of 2020 and just pull up that entire month. And what this does is it actually puts a line here that shows when that support change took place and allows you to visually see this is the behavior before. We made this change either to the environment or to the way that we're supporting the student, and this was the outcome. So it makes it very easy and very clear to see what's going on.
It's almost like a that help I can't get up button, right? where you press and you get the help, right? And it's just, but at the same time, like when you think about what this could do and the consistency, like I am imagining for in my own world, using it for RTI and INRS, which a lot of times they might not be in a resource room or a self-contained room yet, but we're tracking behaviors and it's across the different classrooms. So I guess my question is, does the device travel with the child? Does each child get a device? Does one teacher have a device for multiple students? Am I going to have a lanyard with like 12 devices? What does that look like?
So one of the things that we took a look at when taking a look at that actually exact situation was there are some cases where the school wants to delegate out tracking. So let's say you have a class of 10 students, all of them are being tracked, and you have one individual who's doing the tracking for everybody. Or maybe you've delegated 2 kids to one para, 2 kids to another, 3 kids to another, and then the special ed teacher's taking on the rest. And so one of the features that we added into this was the ability to hold down the button and say switch to and have code words for various students. And there's no limitation on the number of students that can be hooked up to a single device. The only real limitation is your imagination on coming up with code words. So if you said switch to period 1, student 3, I mean, you'd get that particular individual that you'd be tracking. And so you could operate with one button. There was a school I was talking to where they were thinking in that smaller classroom, they'd use one button, but as the children left that classroom to go to other classrooms, there might be another device that travels with them. So kind of one of these, we have a stack of buttons that can be used, but one is going to be the primary button and then the rest will be used on demand. And then there are some classrooms where like the switch to isn't fast enough. So the switch to can take somewhere around 5 to 10 seconds to complete. And if you're tracking a lot for 1 or 2 students, you might have it where you have 1 or 2 students with a dedicated button. And then another button for the remaining students. But it really depends on the environment. And we tried to make it as flexible as possible and adaptable as possible to fit as many environments as we could. And the device itself, this is the old one. The new one is coming out this fall. So we're going to actually be having demos with it pretty soon. But all it is you register the device and then you specify what it is that you want 1 click to me and 2 clicks to me. And with the new one, you specify what you want the code word to be yourself. So you can come up with, all sorts of crazy code words if you wanted to.
I think essentially what we're saying is that it's completely customizable. And I think if you've ever looked at one of these classroom management tools online, yes, you can put in an entire list of kids, but there's so many different options, and usually the options are drop downs. There's some kind of, way that you have to kind of fit your kids into what they give you. It's the opposite with this. You want to track X, Y, and Z because it comes exactly from that IEP and it's specific to that child. You put it in here the exact same way that it's written in the IEP and you track it as such.
I literally have chills because this is the first thing that I've seen in the world of special ed where the mission is pure and that it very much is like, this is for the child. This is not about you buying this great thing that's going to change your world. Like, this is specific to the child. And I learned a long time ago that, an IEP is not written to fit the services that we provide. That's not the way that it's supposed to be. We write it for the child and we have to figure out how to make the services work. And if we don't have it, we need to find it or outsource it. And that's where, there's discrepancy and, there's a lot of things there that, the advocacy is so important. But as you're speaking, I can just tell and feel that this came from such a genuine place. And I know that just based on some of the questions that I got prior to today, okay, what's the price tag?
Well, and we're going to get to that.
Okay.
I wanted to quickly hit up the Teams aspect because this is one of the pieces that I was hoping to not only change, and it really depends on how the school wants to treat it, but this is one of the aspects where I want to change the way that we thought about how we interacted with data. And so I made it possible for entire teams of teachers to be added to this, as well as the ability to go out and say, you know what, we're going to bring in a BCBA, for example, to take a look at 1 or 2 behaviors. So we really only want to share out those 1 or 2 behaviors. And we made this thing HIPAA compliant. So not only are you using it to track information, but that information can't be used or sold for anything other than to help that child, which is a big deal because it basically means that when you transmit this data, you don't have to worry about the privacy concerns of the child. We do a lot on our end to make sure that nothing can get into that data. So, but yeah, let's quickly go off to the price tag. Oh, quick, another point, schedules. So you can do A/B schedules. You can do assembly day schedules, and we try to make that as simple as possible. And then if you want to do other things with the data, you can download a week, a month, or a year into Excel and load it into Google Sheets. It's compatible with that. It's compatible with Excel, and you can make your own diagrams. So
that schedule is going to be very essential as we go into this hybrid every other day, twice a week, whatever it looks like, and to be able to be flexible within that as things change. That was a wonderful addition to the program. So good thinking.
So let's quickly go into how we envision the service being used. So 1 second as I bring up PowerPoint again. This is always fun.
Melanie, I see your comment, and I cannot agree more. The just hearing about how it's going to make the graphs, the teacher stress goes down, the accuracy goes up, and ultimately that's where you're going to get the success with the program and what you're trying to do to improve the behavior. And you know, it really focuses your attention on what it should be focused on, and that's the child, and not getting a chart or a program and a checkbox. Like it truly is. And someone else said they're just in awe, and I have to agree with that. It's just so exciting.
And part of the way that I think about things, just coming from a corporation and tech background, is people's time gets consumed. And the question is, where does it get consumed? Is it getting consumed in the data tracking, or is it getting consumed in those higher tiers of the pyramid where you're solving the problem? You're coming up with methodologies and solutions, and you're really hitting that next tier. And that was part of our goal with this. And so the way that we think about this is, we initially came out with the full transferable license, where you could switch it between students. So you could track one student one day and then switch to another student the next day. And you can design it to be used as it's needed. You can track unlimited behaviors. You can have unlimited access to the Mytaptrack portal. So if you wanted to add 100 people to a single student's team, you could. You could add their doctor. You could add their therapist. You could add their neurologist, and let those people start making data-driven decisions. We do free training for the staff, and the button itself, the device, comes free. But one of the challenges that we saw is that that transferable model was challenging for some people. And so what we want to do is we want to make a much less expensive non-transferable model. It cuts down on the amount of the system that we're using, in the sense of just technology-wise and cost-wise. And so there's some benefit to us, and there's some benefit to the child when you're using the device to actually track their progress throughout the year. And so the non-transferable, we targeted it at $150 for early adopter pricing, and that's for a year. So $150, training comes free, the Mytaptrack 2.0 button comes free, and all access comes for free. The transferable one, we really started looking at, that's more of like a functional behavior assessment, or a tool where you want to track a child for a shorter duration. And that one is $300. And with a lot of the schools that we're talking to, they look at getting like a mix of both. So you have a pool that is dedicated to these specific students, and then you have pools where that might switch between schools in a district, or even children in the same school. So more of a shared resource. That answer that question?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
I think that's very reasonable, you know, considering all that it does. I'm thinking of a student that I had in the past. I think it would have saved me 150 hours of my life had I have had something like this. And, you know, we could have gotten to the intervention much quicker, which is the whole point, right? So,
and there's a school in New Mexico that I was talking to, and our school district, and they had actually hired 3 full-time people to collect this handwritten data, and they'd get it put into a Google spreadsheets, and then those people would take that data and analyze it and create the graphs and create the charts.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things where we were talking to them, and this accomplishes a lot of what those people have to put in a ton of effort to do, and it focuses and empowers the teaching staff in the schools to make better decisions along the way. And then one of the parts that we look at is how do we make it easier for schools who are looking for solutions like this, but their budgets are tight. And so, Jenny, do you want to hop in on this one?
Sure. I think, given where we are right now and the changing needs out there and how there's so much in flux and things are going to continue to be changing, there are opportunities that weren't there before that are now. So for example, we have the CARES Act where, there are federal funds that are available for application that are specific not only for technology, but also, they have funds available for the transition into remote learning and out of remote learning, remote learning for all kids. They have funds that are available specific for the needs of special kids on IEPs, kids who have special needs. So I think that it would behoove everyone to really take a good look at what not just your school, but the district has applied for and see where this might fit in for your particular school's needs. Because there is this federal money that's there and available right now. And there potentially is more coming down the pike that you could even write something like this into very specifically about, how this will serve a role for these kids with IEPs that they're right now in a remote setting there's nothing else available like this that can support them in this ways. Then you have local grants.
Can I jump in quickly, Jenny?
Yeah.
And as part of that, like, think about how this would be used in the home environment. You can actually send the button home with the child and let the parent be tracking those behaviors that they're seeing. And they'd obviously get together with the school staff to set up the behaviors that are being tracked, but they could track real time what behaviors they're seeing and allow the school to coach the parent on how to reimagine how to support their child going through this crazy time period. But
yeah, the special educators right now are being asked to do all kinds of things that they never really were before. And one of those things is exactly what you're talking about, which is, how do you now turn from supporting the child directly in the classroom to through a virtual environment and through the parent? So, I think there's a lot of flexibility right now in terms of how to fulfill the requirements of a child's IEP that's being given to schools and districts, sort of saying, get creative and figure it out. And what this is one very creative way of doing exactly that. I think, if a parent can work very closely with that special educator in sort of a consultative manner to get them trained up. And honestly, we're here too. We provide the training. We are there to support in concert with that. The parent can therefore be able to track information that will be given back to the teacher, and it's an iterative process so that there's this coordination that happens that can serve as a foundation for when the child goes back into the classroom. So, it's people are thinking of all kinds of different ways to serve these kids' needs. And I think that this is one of the ways that is the hardest because parents aren't really prepared or really have the background necessary to be able to track. So it gives them an easier way to do so and allows us, the special educator, to facilitate that with them. So, as far as funding considerations are concerned, there are other things to think about, from an administrator's perspective. How will an administrator have any sense for how, their special ed group as a whole, which is really diverse if you think about it, depending on, you know, the makeup of a particular school or district. How is that administrator to know whether or not these children, who are our absolute most vulnerable in a lot of ways, making progress in any way with the remote learning resources that they're providing to them to be done in the home? So the administrators need this feedback. They need this information to be able to make larger decisions. I think it's in a different slide, but I was going to get to it. You know, one of the decisions right now in a lot of districts is, how do we prioritize who the highest level of need kids are for the very limited amount of in-person services that we are going to provide? Because that, you know, that's one of the larger discussions. Some kids need to be in the classroom. And right now it's hard to tell, you know, what's the cutoff? I mean, what does that look like? Is it a, you know, child who has physical needs? Is it behavioral needs? Is it a combo? You know, is it academic? And so if you can add to that puzzle for an administrator who's making these larger scale decisions about how these kids are functioning at home and whether or not their behavior is really getting in the way of them accessing learning, they can make much better decisions about who do we bring back first? Who are the kids that really need to be back into the classroom sooner than maybe some others? And it's unfortunate that these decisions need to be made, but that this is our reality.
And I think too, because behaviors are going to just look different, because now we're working, depending on what the situations were, more of that like trauma brain of what they were exposed to, whether they had family who was sick or whether they were involved in their community with some of the racial inequalities. There's a lot on the psyche of a child right now that they process things through behaviors. And so I think also getting kids that potentially, you know, I really see an avenue here for the RTI, or the we call it INRRS, the intervention and referral service. You know, we're talking right now, well, how are we going to identify those kids, and how are we going to know who needs what? And, you know, behaviors always have a reason. And I think that thinking outside the box too, of, you know, of not just for individuals with IEPs, but those who possibly could be considered for that based on some of the issues. So I definitely see wide use. Also, just tracking the positives too. I mean, how many different systems have I had in my classroom to track positive behaviors as a way to make that like an intrinsic need, right? I know a popular one is like class dojo, and something that you said. The thing is, it makes that noise. The kids know that I'm going to the device. I tried to hide it, put it on my phone or in the class, and it was just, it blew up in my face. It was great for the first month. And then once I had it, you know, like, do I take away the negative points? What do I do? And the kids all see it, and it was terrible. And it didn't give me the information that I wanted to track. I thought I could like multi and purpose and communicate with the parents, but also motivate the kids. And it didn't work. You know, it was a great idea. It was a great way for me to text a parent. But beyond that, did we get the information that I actually needed or wanted? I didn't. So, you know, I really think that just this technology on a broad scale has a lot of potential. And I'm just so impressed that you were able to see a need and then find a way to make it, you know, work. And I know that this is a very personal thing too, because so does your son still use the tracker? Have you phased it out? How has the tracker been a part of your life personally?
So for my son, we phase it in and we reduce the use of it based off of are we going towards an objective? Because I personally believe that there should be objectives to things that, you know, my family and my school focus on. And a lot of that has to do with accessing academics and understanding what is working and what's not working. Because one of the biggest challenges when you're dealing with social emotional or behavior types issues is it's really hard to see small improvements. And so having the information helps us around that. And then, yeah, it's one of those things where it's a continual tool that we fall back on.
And something else that you mentioned to me that sticks out in my mind is, you know, when you are tracking medication, can I also link this to a therapist that's outside of the school or a doctor, let's say, if it's something like you talked about seizures, you know, like, is that something that you can also do with this device?
Yeah, and the fascinating part about that is since we're HIPAA compliant, the school could share it with the doctor, but we also have a doctor in Washington State where she wants to be able to prescribe the device to some of her patients. And so we actually have the medical contract in place so that she can use it in the diagnoses and prescriptions for some of the kiddos she works with.
Wow, that's a really interesting concept, because it's the technology that once you build the technology, you can kind of use it where, like, I'm thinking just for that notes feature too. That's such a powerful tool to be like, okay, like I, you know, had a brain like surge because I'm on a new med and this is what it felt like. And, you know, I can kind of track that in the moment. Because how many times have, you know, if you've gone to the doctors and you're like, I don't really remember. I just know I felt funny, you know? So
Yeah.
that's, and, you know, for some of our medically fragile kids, what an amazing tool.
Yeah, well, and as the child moves from like elementary school to becoming more and more independent, this tool can actually transition as to who's tracking that information. Because as that child gets closer and closer to graduation, right, we're trying to prepare them for life post. And having them being able to track their own behavior and take notes as to what was going on that upset them in that moment allows them to go back and reflect as to how to adjust and fix their behavior so that that skill set's baked in for once they exit the school system.
Absolutely, right? The goal is always independence. I would love if I could provide my students with what they need and I could just kind of be in the background. That's the absolute goal. So we are approaching the end here. How can people get in touch with you? How can they find out more? And more than that, how can they bring this to their students?
So we have our website is always there. You can always email info@mytaptrack.com. And then through the website, you can actually set up a 30-minute meeting to get a demo with other teachers or with administrators. And kind of how I met you was I've been reaching out to teachers across the country because depending on the classroom, depending on the school district, depending on the state, things change. And so, you know, in some places, teachers are very much empowered to make decisions, to make purchases. In other places, they're less empowered. And in some places, the challenge of having 11 kids in your classroom, in a gen ed classroom, where you're working with both the non-special education students as well as the special education students, there's only one teacher there. And in other places you have dedicated paras. So we're constantly reaching out and treating this as learning opportunities. So if you wanted to learn more and you wanted to do a quick demo and give us your feedback or ideas of what would work for you, we are always open to those discussions.
All right, that sounds awesome. I am going to stop recording. That is the conclusion for this week. Next week, we will be talking about unmasking the realities of what it's going to look like approaching next school year, as some of our teachers are already starting their year. And basically what we'll be focusing on is some of the social emotional aspects, as well as the mental health for the student and the teacher. So please reach out to your school counselors or anyone else who you think might benefit from listening in, and more importantly, participating, because that's how we're going to make a difference, is if we can all support one another and make it through these, the famous word, unprecedented times. So thank you for joining us. We will stick around. So if you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself and talk to our guests. And thank you both so much for being here today and reaching out.
Thank you.